Hello and welcome to the week ahead. This week I thought it would be kind of fun to do something a little different. We had a bit of a pullback in the markets on Thursday and Friday, and I think a thing that's on a lot of people's minds is that the market needs a bit of a pullback, a bit of a rest. I talked about it last week, how maybe we could get a few days back pulled in, but that ultimately it will probably result to the upside. And we did get a bit of pullback over the last 2 days, but it wasn't exactly a bear feast. So I thought it would be kind of fun this week to talk about specifically the Mag 7 and how, because, they're the biggest stocks in tech and they drive the QQQ. And in many ways, the QQQ drives the SPYs. So let's start here with Apple. Let's just take a look at everything. Where are we at? So I often do this where I keep my lower half of my chart on the daily time frame and my upper half of the chart I typically keep on the 30-minute time frame, but I wanted to this week keep it on the 4-hour. So down here on the daily one, let's actually expand this for a minute. And what do you see here on Apple? A big, nice, round cup. And let's zoom out. What is going on in the monthly? Well, this is a pretty clear monthly uptrend, but it was a very fast move from these lows to this high. Do I expect it to just blast through this? It could. Anything can happen. The markets can surprise you, but it would make more sense to me for it to not break the all-time high or break it slightly and then try again, like have a bit of a rest before pushing through. Now, it's honestly showing no signs of that. If we jump back down to the daily time frame, it's basically a bull flag right now. So on these last few days when the market was pulling in, Apple has held up pretty strong. But I do look at this and you can't help but think, is this going to round? There's a terrible looking cup and handle, but you get the idea, right? Like have a bit of a rest here before pushing all the way through. It would make sense. So it's something I'm thinking about, just looking at this chart. Also worth noting that Monday, Tuesday are still September. So it'll be very telling how this monthly candle closes, right? Does it close right at the high here? Does it pull back and have an upper wick? Because if it is unable to break that high and we do set a top there, basically, that changes how you can view this candle, it changes how you can view this market, because I always feel like the candles that close at the highs, like look at this, close at the high, continue to close at the high, up, near the high, up, near the high, up, sort of almost like a doji or a rest, and then started closing lower, lower, lower. Again, the next leg up, close at the high, close near the high, not quite so high, huge pull in, so it does matter how they close. And so I'm thinking about that on all of these charts. Now back to the daily time frame, and let's just look at the 4-hour now. So I like the 4-hour because there's a few lines I've got on here. I'll explain what they are first. So the orange line is the 5-day simple moving average. The blue line is the daily EMA 12. And this other blue line is with this dark label is the weekly EMA 12. And then this red line here that's very zigzaggy is an RSI level of 30 on the 4-hour time frame. In other words, it'll be oversold on the 4-hour time frame if price gets to this red line. So what that means is typically when I'm looking for a weekly high or low, I want it to tag this weekly EMA 12 and I want it to get 4-hour oversold. Now, it doesn't always do that perfectly, but it's kind of what you want. So just to walk you through how this works, from this low to this high, you get a weekly higher low and a weekly higher high. Coming in for a weekly higher low, it doesn't quite tag the 4-hour oversold and it gets nowhere near the weekly EMA 12. If you want to get a solid move back up from the weekly tag, you kind of want it to come a bit deeper, but it didn't do that. It didn't even get to this support, prior resistance, now support. So it's just showing a lot of strength. But when it does that, what you see here is that it wasn't able to really push a lot higher. It did get a little bit higher, but then it came back in really close to this low again. But what did it do this time? It got closer to the weekly EMA 12, which was rising, and it tagged 4-hour oversold right here. And then it got a nice strong leg up. You see that? And so I'm always looking like, when we're coming in for a weekly higher low, how close are we getting to this weekly EMA 12? And are we managing to get that 4-hour oversold? When something gets oversold, it's basically a moment in the market where you find out how much conviction the other side has. And so, that it wasn't able to get oversold here shows that, the bears have very little conviction. When it did finally get oversold, again, the bears gave up. They didn't even manage to get it to the weekly EMA 12. They gave up and the bulls took over and boom, away you go. And I think, if you just look at the chart and what was happening this whole time, you can see why. Like a lot of bears were not confident this thing was going to go back down. It's just had too much strength, and the bulls are like, it's going to the top. We're going back to all-time highs. And so you can understand the sentiment that people had as this was occurring, right? And so here we are. We were basically back to all-time highs on Apple, and we're basically bull flagging here. And as the market's been pulling back the last couple of days, I think it really is important what's going to happen with the Qs over the next few days, because if the Qs don't pull back any deeper, this can totally just bull flag and push right out. And we'll see. We'll see what happens next week. So that's what I'm thinking about Apple. Google, let's jump out and look at that one. Put this back on the daily really quick. So Google is riding the daily EMA 12. It is in blue sky breakout. This was the prior all-time high right here. It had a rounding bottom, and it just pushed right on through and then gapped up. So it has a gap down below it here. And it tested daily EMA 12. It's getting a bit of a bounce on the short-term time frame. Again, look at the weekly EMA 12. Like, it's so extended from this gap up that on this pullback where it did get 4-hour oversold, just barely, it's nowhere near the weekly EMA 12. And we now have a declining 5-day simple moving average. So that's not the end of the world. The 5-day declines all the time and then continues up. Here's another down and then up. So not the end of the world at all. It can absolutely bounce from here and continue up. But I will say that we did get a high, higher low on the daily time frame, a high, higher low, higher high, and now a lower low. So the opportunity is there for it to get a bit of a rest. And if you look at this on the monthly time frame, this is another one of those ones where, like, look at this chart. Look at how astronomically fast this thing is moving now. And it's going to be very telling how this monthly candle closes, because, again, there's 2 days left, Monday, Tuesday. If this thing pulls back deeper in Monday and Tuesday, even if it tries to get back towards the gap, this monthly candle is going to look pretty ugly with a huge wick on the top. So if Google wants to continue this crazy rally it's on, I think it needs to close this thing near the highs. It needs to hold up here somewhere. So that's going to be a really interesting one to watch. I'm really curious to see what's going to happen on Google. It's not a name I actually trade very much, but I certainly didn't see this coming. I did not think this thing was going to do what it's done. But look, every other time that it's tagged the daily EMA 12 on this whole way up, it has held and pushed higher. So we will see. Amazon, this is a super interesting chart. So I'll get to what's happening in here in a bit, but look at this daily chart. I was looking at the chop that we've had here. Look at this brown line here, the 200-day simple moving average. It is uptrending for sure, but we've tested it once, twice, actually even more than that. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 tests of it with a rounding top now, and so it just feels like this thing is not ready to move. It feels like it's starting to do something like this, like just have a sideways range and it might be dead money for a while. I tried to play this thing to the long side and ended up getting out with a small win. And I'm glad I did, because I thought it would, over here, that it was just going to push through these all-time highs. Maybe this would be sort of a cup and handle kind of deal right here. And through, but that did not happen. And now we're pushing a bit lower. So is it resting? I don't know. It's just like we're in a chop zone. You can basically draw a box over here of we're chopping in this range. And that's what you see here on the 4-hour time frame is basically we've got a top and now we've got a bottom that we're coming back in to test. And this just could be a range we balance in for a while. We're going to have to wait and see. So in the short term, I could see that, it rallies from here and goes back up, tests some more of this balance area over here. But it's not a chart that I'm super bullish on. So yeah, and I think if you look at it on the monthly, it doesn't look terrible, right? But the fact that it was unable to get to that high, then pulled lower, and it was again failed again and is now pushing lower, I could see it pulling in deeper. And I do have this balance area here that I called out that I really thought was telling, because you can see there was this top that was set and then we chopped around it. We've been you can see all the balance that has occurred here. So it wouldn't even surprise me to come back in and test this thing again and just build a big range here for a while. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. Interesting chart, but not that bullish in my opinion. Tesla. This was an amazing consolidation here. And it's worth noting, let's just talk about this for a minute. So high, low, lower high, higher low, lower high, higher low, higher high. And actually this could be over here. but higher high, that's your first tell when it broke this high that the break is going to be the upside. And I think this is classic Tesla, where a lot of people probably bought this break and were like looking for it to continue and then had to get out because it immediately came back in, and then they faked you out again, and then it came back in, but again setting higher lows the whole way up, and then boom, turn on the jets. So in the last couple of days where Qs and SPY have been weak, this thing has been holding up. It's bull flagging. It seems now an inevitability that it'll test these all-time highs. However, let's just look at this on the weekly time frame. I'm going to hide my drawings. Let's look at it on the monthly, actually. What do you notice about this chart? I see a lot of upper wicks. Like Tesla has this tendency to form wicks, actually on both sides, upper and lower. Huge wicks, 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 wicks. Look at them all. Look at all these wicks. Look at the one here at the all-time high. Wicks. And here we are pushing. Is this candle going to close at the highs here? Or is it going to form another wick? Again, we've got 2 days left. A lot can happen in 2 days. I don't know. I have no idea. But it feels like 500 is an inevitability at this point. You know, it's worth putting a thing on there. Are we going to get there? Don't know. But in the meantime, it's strong, right? And if we jump back out and look at this thing on the 4-hour time frame, look how it's been behaving. Look at all these lows. 4-hour oversold, 4-hour oversold, 4-hour oversold, 4-hour oversold, almost a 4-hour, almost. Every time it gets to 4-hour oversold, it's had a bounce. And for here, it did it again. So ever since this one, it's been bounce, 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 a 4-hour oversold. We are now extended from that. We're holding daily EMA 12 and pushing up. Doesn't mean we're going to continue. I don't know. We'll see. Monday, Tuesday are going to be really interesting days, and I think they matter a lot for the whole market. But would it surprise me if we came back in and tried to, you know, do a tag down here before pushing back up again? Absolutely not. And that would then form that crazy wick on the monthly time frame if we did that. So worth noting and worth keeping your eye out for. Microsoft, hide my drawings here, was dead money for better part of a year, and then pulled in on the tariff news and has been rallying ever since. And now again, it's in this dead money mode where it's just balancing sideways while the market's doing stuff. So I don't pay a lot of attention to this chart right now because it tends to do this. It tends to just be dead for a long time and then finally make a move. So I'm just not really paying much attention to it, and it doesn't seem to be affecting the market much at all. Meta, testing weekly EMA 12 over and over and over again, and it's there again now. I think, yeah, this is one of those ones where it's not a consistent buy at the 4-hour oversold. I mean, it did bounce from here. It did bounce from here. It's there again now. This is a tough one. And we're even at this prior all-time high. We're testing the prior all-time high right now. Get my drawings back on here. So yeah, there's that prior all-time high that we, you know, this was a cup handle, and burst through. Back test, and you would have expected it to continue, but it didn't. It you know, it hit the top and rejected again. So this is the current all-time high, rejected again, and now it's testing the prior all-time high again. But that the weekly EMA 12 is holding. And by the way, I keep this other blue line along here with the weekly EMA 12. That's the 50-day simple moving average, which a lot of people trade against. And it's funny to me how closely these track each other, the weekly EMA 12 and the 50-day simple moving average. And I think that's a lot of why the weekly works, is because so many people trade the 50. But anyway, we're there again now, and we're daily stair stepping. It could absolutely bounce from here. And I think this week, this is one that I want to watch, because if we don't just completely fall over and lose the weekly EMA 12, I think this has a good chance of bouncing again and trying again for the upside. So this one is going to be on my watch list for this week. I want to see what happens. I want to see if options players come in and start sweeping this thing, looking for highs. NVDA is part of the semis, but it's been basically sideways while so many other semis are running really hard. You can see here on this whole move up, it almost never touched the 4-hour oversold. When it did bounce. When it did bounce. When it did bounce. It did bounce again. And we're basically sideways. You know, anytime you see something like this with NVIDIA, you got to be prepared for the upside channel to break at some point. It's, you know, it's bumping underneath this resistance, and the more times it hits it, the more likely at some point it's going to break through. And at this point now, we're getting these. This was probably a weekly, maybe even a monthly higher low. Not quite. So here's your weekly higher low against the weekly EMA 12. It held, pushed up, it's rejecting from the all-time high. But does that mean it's the end of the road? I don't think so. I think it's setting now daily higher lows and higher highs. It's probably going to set another daily higher low here. It probably just did here on Thursday. And, you know, it's going to try pushing up to that all-time high again. It sure looks like it anyway. Yes, it's possible. It can, you know, do this kind of a thing where it tries and rejects and pulls in. I don't think that's in the cards right now. There's too many people invested in computing and chips to have this thing fail right now. It wouldn't make sense for the biggest chip maker in the world to have a massive failure. But maybe, the market can surprise you. Don't quote me. You make the trade your own. This is not financial advice, just sort of looking at technical analysis. So I think I'm actually pretty bullish NVIDIA. I think there's probably a lot of people accumulating in here. And the weekly EMA12 does continue to keep holding. I think if it did tag it again in the next week, I would be interested. I'd have to be a buyer down there, especially if I saw sweepers coming in and buying this thing, which there will be, but it would need to be significant. I'd need to see people really, as they say in the steam room, laying wood. Okay, so this is a pretty long video already, but that's the Mag 7. Nothing about this seems that bearish. I think at worst a couple of names like Microsoft and Amazon seem to be sort of chopping sideways and just sort of balancing. Nothing is falling over. Everything seems to be quite strong. 4-hour oversold keeps holding again and again on the strong names. Weekly EMA 12 keeps holding on the strong names. And that also means the 50-day is holding on these strong names. And so let's take one look now at the Qs. And what do we see? The pull in on near the end of the week here, which was Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday was the dip, and then we basically broke the high of Thursday on Friday. That is our potential daily higher low, which is above this one. I did not get anywhere near the weekly EMA 12, so we are still extended from the 50 and the weekly. And it could make sense to pull in, but we didn't get anywhere near 4-hour oversold, which is honestly what I was hoping for. When we started to get a pull in, I was like excited that we might get a chance to, let the weekly EMA 12 catch up, let this high over here be tested. But it was already tested back over on this day, so it could just be continuing up. And there's nothing in those in the Mag 7 stocks that tell me that this thing is going to fail. The bears aren't really showing any real strength here. And let's even look at, one second, the volume on these pullbacks down here. So the dots here is the average of these volume candles, and you can see on this day here was higher than average volume, right? You can see it here. On the next day down, it was lower than average volume slightly. On the bottoming day, it was higher than average volume. What does that tell you? It tells you that the flush was real, but buyers bought that dip with volume and pushed it back up. Friday was a bit of a slow day, lower than, probably average to lower than average volume. So what you really want to see on the way back up is strength, and we might see that Monday. It'll be a very interesting week. Are we going to push this up? How are we going to close this monthly candle in the Qs? This is a beautiful chart, and even if we pulled in a couple days, this would still be a super bullish candle. We're stair-stepping up here on the monthly time frame. Just strong, strong, strong. I still stand by what I said last week. So seeing a lot of strength in the market, this little pullback is kind of a nothing burger to me. And we'll see what happens on Monday, Tuesday. Are we going to push back up to all-time highs here on the Qs? Absolutely could, especially when you have a strong name like Apple, which barely took a breather at all over the last week while every other names were resting. So we will see. That's it for me. Have a great week and happy trading. Hey, if you like my indicators on TradingView and you like the content I'm producing here on this channel, please remember to like and subscribe.